I'm going to go ahead with the meeting beginning ritual. 起立，面向佛堂，参加先鞠躬，一鞠躬，再鞠躬，三鞠躬，参加各位的传习鞠躬，开班一鞠躬，请坐下。
What does chapter 74 say? Well, here's what it says, and this is one where translation quality is critical to understanding what Lao Tzu is trying to say. So here's the translation. 74. People do not fear death. How can they be threatened with death? If people are made to constantly fear death, then those who act unlawfully, I can capture and kill them. Who would dare? There exists a master executioner that kills. If we substitute for the master executioner to kill, it is like substituting for the great carpenter to cut. Those who substitute for the great carpenter to cut, it is rare that they do not hurt their own hands. So my first comment on this is that in English, it doesn't convey the feel of the original very well. So it's easy to get lost in the words and not know the original intent. Let me describe the original intent when this was written 2,500 years ago. First, we have a couple of lines that is the basic premise of this entire chapter. And the basic premise basically is like, okay, you think that by threatening people with death, that this will be a very effective deterrent, deter them from doing what you don't want them to do. But what happens if they do not fear death? How would you be able to threaten them? Your deterrence is not going to be effective. That is the basic premise. So keep those two lines in mind. Then the next four lines, the tone of the original is that, well, we all know what most people think. Most people feel that if you are somehow able to make others fear death, then anyone that acts out of bounds, anyone who acts illegally, you would just capture and kill them. So then they wouldn't dare to do that. They wouldn't dare to step outside the law. Then we get into the second half, which uses the example of the master executioner or the great carpenter. These are metaphors for karmic forces that dole out what each person richly deserves, because karma always works. So the idea at the second half, we'll get into in great detail, is that, well, if the karmic balance is already there and it's acting at all times to maintain that balance, and you feel somehow in your human wisdom, in your human level limits and wisdom, or what you think of as wisdom, you feel like you can take over that particular job and duty and mete out justice on behalf of karma. Can you really do that? Is that really a good idea? So when I really understood the original as I was working on this translation, this is the chapter that really rocked my world. And the reason is because as a young man, I was always a political conservative. So I fully supported, like many other people who are ethnically Chinese, I fully supported capital punishment. When I saw this and understood what Lao Tzu was trying to say 2,500 years ago, because of the deep respect that I had for everything, for chapter 1 to 73, and how they've been proven true for me time and time again, suddenly I run smack into this chapter 74 that says something that was completely opposite to what I believed in. So then I was faced with a dilemma. It's like, wow, Lao Tzu seems to be right about everything else I have seen so far up until this point. Suddenly he's talking about something that I just don't believe in at all. So is this a case where I have to basically be like, okay, we're gonna have to agree to disagree. I'm gonna skip past 74 I'll translate it exactly as Lao Tzu says, but I don't feel that I can get on board what he's saying right now in regards to capital punishment. Okay, that's what I thought upon my first encounter with 74. Time passes, and I see I was beginning to see gradually over time that just like everything else that I have read and understood in the Tao Te Ching, with this one particular topic, I've come to more and more agree with what he's saying until now I have no choice but to say that, yep, I have abandoned my previous position as a political conservative. And in fact, I have, I think to the annoyance of my previous former conservative friends, I have now taken on many of the positions and ideas and philosophies contrary to what I used to believe in. So the positive thing, the silver lining in all of this is that I have proven to myself that indeed I can change. I'm capable of change. I'm not dogmatic. I'm not inflexible. On the other hand, there's a whole bunch of people, friends that I used to agree with. Now I just can't, and I have to let go. The other lesson that I have to learn is to let go of the need to debate these topics. And I understand where they stand. That's fine. They can continue on believing what they believe in. They now know where I stand. I stand with the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu, on his position of capital punishment, which is that don't try to do the job that nature is already doing. Don't try to do the job yourself as an individual that society has already done by setting up a legal system. Don't try to be the vigilante. You're not Batman. Batman is a fictional character. It's a comic book character. It's not a real life individual. There's no real life Batman. Okay, we got to be real. So no capital punishment, no vigilante justice. You can still watch Dirty Harry and Clint Eastwood on screen, and he's going to be he's going to mete out that kind of justice. But it doesn't. That's Hollywood. That's the movie screen. That's a script. You live in the real world. Your life oftentimes does not follow a Hollywood script. That's the unfortunate truth. So that's where I'm at. I'm sure I anger a lot of people when they hear me say all this. They will probably send me a lot of links to different websites that will debunk all the mushy liberal ideas in my brain. So guys, it's not going to work. I've thought about this quite a bit, and I agree with what Lao Tzu is trying to say. As we go through this line by line, I hope to explain why I agree with Lao Tzu. And I'd like to share with you the logical sequence of his thoughts, the way he expresses these ideas, so that perhaps you, like myself, can also have your world be rocked. If you are, if at this moment you are also strongly supportive of capital punishment, perhaps this will give you some food for thought. Okay, so what is the first thing that we always do with 74, with any chapter of the Tao Te Ching? Well, first we look for patterns so that we can divide it up into different sections, and then we tackle the sections one by one and tackle the lines one by one. That way we get a really, really detailed and clear understanding of what the original is trying to say. So it's often easier because every Chinese character is exactly the same width. It's often easier to look for similar patterns in the original Chinese characters, even if you can't read exactly what it says. So I've scanned the lines up and down, and I've identified some repeating characters for you. Let me show you what they are. So they are highlighted in red. So without knowing what they say exactly, you can still tell that 7 and 8 have a whole bunch of repeating characters, that they are the same, in the same position. So the translation of the characters in red in English is a master executioner that kills. So master executioner that kills is roughly repeated in the English from 7 to 8 because the original Chinese is the same. Then in 9 and 10, so this one is a little tricky because the characters are off by one position, but you can tell that if you take the offsets of one position into account, that the characters are the same. So the third character corresponds to the second character here, and the third character, the fourth character here corresponds to the third character here, and so on. In the English, this four characters. The four characters are translated as substituting for the Great Carpenter to cut. So more or less the same in the English for 9 and 10. Okay, so what does that say about the structure? Well, here's what we can tell. We can tell that from 7 onward, it goes into the land of metaphors to use the Master Executioner and then the Great Carpenter to explain this concept of, in the previous chapter, was called the heavenly net. At this point in Chinese history, the ancient Chinese 2,500 years ago had no idea what Buddhism was, and certainly had no concept of karma. They did have concept of cause and effect, and how everything in nature is circular. So they could totally get on board with the idea that what goes around comes around, even they didn't have a term like karma for that. So these are different attempts to convey the rough concept of karma, that you have this Master Executioner, that if you do something really dumb, you may be rewarded with death because of the Master Executioner. So it makes sense because the previous chapter to this, 73, was devoted to that. It talks about how there are people who are very brave, but they are totally reckless, they're totally thoughtless, and they often will come to harm or they will be killed. So having read 73, now looking at 74, it makes a lot more sense. And it's the same with the Great Carpenter, and we'll get to that later on, but let's stick to the structure. So as I said, 7, 8, 9, 10, and even 11, they belong in the same section that's using the metaphor to make a point. So what we can do is that we can put a line, a thick line between 6 and 7, so everything above that is like the first half, everything below that is the second half. So I think now you can see that. If we're just looking at the English, it may not be terribly obvious. Now, another thing to divide, but a smaller division, a thinner line dividing the first half, is going to be between 2 and 3. And that's because 1 and 2 are a single thought that, hey, what happens when people don't fear death? How can they be threatened with death? So that's one idea. And then we go on to, hey, if you make people fear death, and then you can, the ones that are unlawful, you can capture and kill them, so they wouldn't dare to be unlawful. So that's the other thought. So the first half can be further divided into 2 sections, and I'll use a thin line for that, as you can see. And now I think we are ready to delve into 74 in depth and detail, starting with line 1. So, well, actually, one more thing before we go there, before we get into line 1 in detail. I want to provide an overall summary of how to think of 74. So remember, the first part, the first 2 lines, is about the basic premise, which is questioning the effectiveness of deterrence. You know, how do you threaten people with death if they don't fear death? Does deterrence really work, in other words? So what about the second half? Well, most people have the concept that if you make people fear death, then they wouldn't dare to step out of bounds. So I'll encapsulate that with one sentence here. Here's what many people think. Then the bottom half is the Tao. And when speaking of the Tao, There's the repetition of the Master Executioner, and then there's the repetition of the Great Carpenter, using these as a very visual way, a visual symbolism to explain what the Tao is and what it does. So this is like a quick overview of what the chapter is supposed to convey. And so I said that translation quality is critical for this chapter because, to be perfectly frank, I don't get this idea at all. When I look at just any translation out there, I get something that's distorted beyond recognition. Okay. Now we can zoom in on the lines, line by line. And indeed, for the first line, let's go character by character. 4 characters there. First character means people, subjects, the citizenry. The second character, bu, is the commonly used character for no or not. And then we have the character for fear, being afraid of. And then the last character, translated only one way, death. So literally, when you put it together, people not fear death. So to render that into more readable English takes very little work. In this case, all we have to do is dress it up a little bit. People do not fear death. So it's almost just exactly the same as a literal transcription. Okay, so let's move on. Basic premise, what happens when people no longer fear death? So, clarification. When we say people no longer fear death, this is not a John Lennon song. Imagine about what happens when there's no heaven and hell, people no longer fear death, everybody's spiritually enlightened. This is not talking about that lack of fear. This is talking about situations in life that could happen to any one of us where you don't even care if you live or die. What could be a situation like that? Well, we'll get into any more details, but you can probably imagine some cases when you find yourself betrayed by people you trust. You may be so angry, so full of rage in that moment that the deterrence of the death penalty is no deterrence to you at all. You don't care. You just want to kill the person who betrayed you. That's one example. Or when someone cuts you off on the freeway, whichever comes first. Just want to kill them. You don't care. Okay, so this is not about being spiritually enlightened, thus losing the fear of death. Instead, it's what it's saying is that, yeah, people usually have a very healthy fear of death, but there are situations when that is not the case. So in addition to the rage scenario, I want to bring up some of the other possibilities with everyone. So we'll go one more slide and then we'll take a mid-meeting break. So what are some of the other possibilities? In the grips of extreme emotions, so we've talked about one, extreme anger and rage that causes you to do things that you would not normally do. You know, in that moment, you are seeing red, you become like a berserker and you just attack, you just want to kill, you just want to end someone's life. You know, could be a jealous rage, could be anger and rage caused by reasons that other than jealousy, it could be a whole bunch of different things, but the bottom line is that you could get so mad that you just want to kill someone, and consequences be damned. Okay, what's another possibility? Revenge, retribution, striking back, not caring if you live or die. So it may not be the red hot rage of the moment, but a smoldering anger and a thirst for vengeance that drives you. So you're not literally losing your mind in that moment and then kill someone, but you are out for some sort of vengeance, and therefore you plot, you figure out ways, you plan. This is a premeditated murder, basically. But you have a plan, and you want your day of retribution. You want to strike back, and you don't care what the consequences are. So that's another possibility. So right away, in both 1 and 2, you're going to see that if you thought of capital punishment as deterrence, in those cases, they don't actually work. You're not going to stop anyone who is in that state, who has that plan. You're not going to stop anyone. You're not going to be able to say that, hey, listen, if they catch you, then it's the electric chair for you, or it's you're going to be put to death, or something. It's not going to matter. So number 3 is a scenario that is like a fighting for your life, survival type of scenario. May have nothing to do with vengeance, may have nothing to do with rage or anger, but it has everything to do with the instinct to survive. When you are fighting for your life, when it's you or the other person, and you have to kill or be killed, you may not be thinking about consequences at all. So the death penalty is no deterrent when you're willing to just do anything at all to survive. So again, these are 3. There are many other situations where the death penalty loses the deterring power. These are just some examples to help you think about that. Let's keep exploring this idea for just a moment, that the idea that there are instances, there are times when it won't do you any good to try to threaten someone with death. So the second line is the question, how can they be threatened with death? And I'm expanding on that to say that the threat of death has no power. So, as I mentioned, for number 3 in the previous slide, if you are fighting for your own survival, you're not worried about the consequences of your actions. You just want to live. You just want to not die. And if later on your actions will cause you to be subject to capital punishment, you will probably think that, well, I'll just worry about that when the time comes. For now, my immediate survival is at risk. So in similar fashion, if you are facing warriors who believe in a particular cause, a cause bigger than them, and they are already on the battlefield, they already know that there's a real possibility for them to die on the battlefield. When, if you were to threaten them with death, that's not going to do anything. It's not going to slow them down. And this leads me to what I want to let everyone know is just a joke. So I don't want anyone to get too grim about this. You cannot deter suicide bombers with capital punishment. You can't say, if you do that suicide bombing stuff, we're going to put you to death. Well, perhaps you can if somehow you were able to pick up all the tiny little pieces of the suicide bomber together, maybe with some super glue, resurrect him somehow, and then kill him. Right? But this is just a dramatic way to say that, if that is already your plan, something like that is already your plan, then literally you cannot stop that person with a threat of capital punishment. And this reminds me of a comic book that I used to read back in the 80s. So, it's kind of obscure, probably a lot of you don't know it, but there is a line from that particular comic book, a quote that I thought is pretty applicable. Let me share with you what that is. So Frank Miller is a comic book writer, artist, who was very big in the 80s and 90s. He, in fact, was the one who did the Daredevil. His run on the Daredevil comic books is the basis for the Daredevil television show that we see right now. So he came up with this comic book, a graphic novel, Ramen, and the tagline, if you intend to die, you can do anything. So I thought about how true that was. in this particular story, the main character, the Ronin, is facing against this very powerful demon, and he already knows that he has no chance against the demon fighting one-on-one. But it's okay, because the demon can be killed by the blood of an innocent, and therefore he intends to die using his blood and take the demon down with him. So if you already have that plan to die, that's it. You can do whatever you want. You can achieve whatever objective you want. And that certainly applies to all of those scenarios that we were just talking about. So to be able to, so one point to be made is that to be able to free yourself from the fear of death can be very liberating and empowering. It can give you all kinds of power to do all kinds of stuff. Let's continue. So then we get into the section right after, which is about the conventional concept. So most people not really understanding that the deterrence can lose its power, are mired in the old way of thinking about all of this. And what that is that, let's break this down, break down line 3 character by character. So first character, 若 means if, 使 let means same character as before, means people, same as before, 常 constantly, and then 畏 the fear character once again, and 死 the death character once again. If let people constantly fear death. So we can actually translate this in a way that's very close to the original in the literal verbatim transcription. If people are made to constantly fear death, or if you want, you can phrase it in the way that you would prefer, which may be if you let people constantly fear death. That's fine. So conventional thinking, you can control people through fear. Now think about how this was written 2,500 years ago, and that is still true. That part is still true today. People constantly are ruled or controlled or manipulated through fear, different kinds of fear. So the conventional thinking, make sure they fear death and then threaten them with death. So from the perspective of the king or the emperor, the ordinary, unremarkable, or even incompetent, inept ruler would automatically go to that. That's the go-to. That's the default position. That's the unimaginative way of ruling a kingdom is through the threat of death, punishment, etc. Well, think along these lines, and that's because such rulers can't really come up with anything else. They can't imagine any other way of doing it, so automatically they'll go to, okay, well, if they don't listen, I will kill them. It's as simple as that. Now, the trick, the secret of the Tao Te Ching is that when you read about all of these things having to do with ancient rulers, you also want to immediately reflect back on two different things. One, you want to imagine yourself as the ruler of your own private kingdom, the kingdom called your life. Then you want to see how well that applies to you, like the way you interact with other people. So, example, are you prone to anger? Are you prone to lash out at other people? Do other people maybe are afraid of setting you off on a fit of rage, and therefore they walk on eggshells around you. They're very cautious when interacting with you. They want to be careful not to get you mad. If so, then you are like an incompetent ruler that only knows to rule your kingdom through the fear of death. Is that making sense with everybody? There's another level when you apply that to yourself, and that is your own inner governance. What I mean is you dealing with your own inner thoughts, your inner mental landscape. How does that apply? Well, consider that a ruler that is inept, incompetent, unimaginative, can't think of any other possibilities other than kill them, off with their heads. Well, imagine if that was your internal representation of who you are as a person, inflexible, black and white, no shades of gray. A ruler like that does not think about extenuating circumstances, shades of gray, punishment to fit the crime, all of that complexity stuff, but only, well, if they displease me, then off with their heads. So the idea is that a Tao cultivator would seek to cultivate flexibility of mind and the ability to understand complexity while still keeping life simple. So easier said than done, but that's how you would apply that by turning that around and reflect on yourself. We'll get into that in more details in just a moment. Okay, let's take a look at line 4 for now. And I want to focus first on this character. So this character, first I'll bring out the pinyin, QI. So for those of you who are not familiar with the pinyin system, when you look at QI as a pronunciation, you might say qui, you might say ki, but it's actually qi. So in the pinyin system, Q is always CH. Yeah, I don't like it. I think it's confusing, but that's how in mainland China they would denote the pronunciation of this particular character is with QI. So just know that it's supposed to sound like qi. It's very common in Chinese to say qi guai, meaning something is strange or something is not right. Qi, so the meaning is unusual or strange. In this case, in this particular chapter of the Tao Te Ching, it does not mean unusual or strange. The meaning is related to that, but it's a little bit departing from the usual meaning in modern Mandarin. So in this ancient utilization of this particular character, it means being unusual in the sense of not following the usual boundaries of the law, not staying within the usual boundaries of the law. You're outside of it, and that's unusual. So strange in the context of not being like everybody else, that's law abiding. So the way to depict that in translation would be like illegally or unlawfully, which is what I picked. So what it's trying to say is that, well, if people constantly fear death and then they stray outside the boundaries of the law, if they're unusual in that way, I will capture and kill them. That's basically the meaning. Okay, so we put that character in the middle of the 3 characters here. First one being like do, and then qi, the strange or the unusual or the outside the law, those who. So those who commit actions outside the usual boundaries of the law is what that is. And that means criminals. All right, moving on. So what about the criminals? Well, the conventional notion is that, well, I'll just capture and kill them if they dare to step outside the boundaries of the law, and we'll capture and kill them. So it's black and white, no shades of gray, no extenuating circumstances, no consideration of any factors. The law is the law. What? It was self-defense. Too bad. The law is the law, and now off with your head. That type of thing. So the idea is that this is the conventional notion which does not take complexity into account. In a ruler, it's a ruthless tyrant. In a person, a dogmatic, inflexible mindset in this individual. Someone who doesn't understand shades of gray, internally or externally. So someone who, in dealing with other people, are very dogmatic and therefore easily will take offense or feel insulted at anything. Internally, someone who does not permit himself or herself the ability to think with different angles, different perspectives, different levels of understanding, and be empathetic with other people. So that person would embody this conventional mindset that in Tao cultivation, Lao Tzu would say, we all have to transcend that. We all have to get beyond that. Okay. Now let's talk about line 6. Who would dare? So remember, the overall concept is that the incompetent ruler resorts to fear because it is the only way he knows, and that particular way doesn't work. It's not going to work. And this is where we, as I mentioned, this is what we have to turn that around and do a little bit of self-reflection. You, as the ruler of your life, you should also examine the role that fear plays in your life, in all its different manifestations. So do you utilize fear in your interaction with other people? Do you let fear rule you? This is the other level, because if you think about the incompetent rulers, the reason why he would use fear to oppress the population, the citizens, the subjects of his kingdom, is because he fears what will happen if he doesn't use the oppressive power of fear. He fears what will happen if he doesn't use the power of fear. So fear is prominent in the thinking of such a person. So one question to ask, are other people reluctant to tell you the truth because it may set you off? Are you someone who is known to have a bad temper and therefore people have to be careful around you? I think that the suggestion from Lao Tzu is quite clear that if you were cultivating the Tao, you want to be someone where people are comfortable to tell you the truth, that you can always get the truth from different sources or what they see as the truth. You then, as a sage in training, you would then have the ability to put together the truth that you get from different sources, weave them into an overall perspective to understand the situation as close to the absolute objective truth as you can manage. But if fear is something that runs strong in your life, then what you get is going to be a filtered version of reality. It's going to be a distortion of reality as people tell you what you want to hear. So, and that is going to lead to a very negative end because of the distortion that you have in your mind that doesn't actually match reality itself. So let me talk about fear for just a moment. This is continuing the question, what role does fear play in your life? Now, fear can play many different kinds of roles. I've singled out a few for your attention specifically. So, fear of disappointment. You don't want to be disappointed by yourself or by other people. So remember, we're talking both internally and externally. So if you don't want to be disappointed, then you keep yourself from expecting more from other people. If you expect more from other people, you are afraid that you may be disappointed. Same with yourself. You are not expecting more from yourself because you don't want to disappoint yourself. So think about how that alone, that particular fear, can hold you back. What are the kinds of fears? Consider the fear of betrayal. So this is stronger than disappointment now. You know, if you're betrayed by someone, it's not just that they have disappointed you, they have betrayed your trust. So if you are afraid of that, if you have an unreasonable fear of betrayal, it'll keep you from trusting anybody. It'll keep you from having anyone close to you whom you feel can have your absolute 100% trust. And that's how lasting relationships are built on, that kind of trust. If you can't have that kind of trust, you can't have that kind of relationship, that is the fear of betrayal, doing something very negative in your life. So what are the kinds of fear? Fear of failure. What if I fail? What if I try it and I don't succeed? What if I fall on my face? What if I do a face plant straight into the ground? I don't want that to happen, so I'm not even going to try. So fear of failure will keep you from trying. Now, time for the flip side. What about fear of success? What is that? Fear of success is also rather common, and it happens when people associate all kinds of things with success. If I succeed, I'm gonna have less freedom. If I succeed, I'm gonna be like those celebrities that are always hounded by paparazzi. If I succeed, I become more materialistic, I become less spiritual. If I succeed, I lose my friends. If I succeed, success is gonna get to my head, I become arrogant. If I succeed, I blah, blah, blah. It goes on and on. People will associate success with all kinds of imaginary negative scenarios. And therefore, to prevent themselves from succeeding, thus encountering all the negativity, they will sabotage themselves. They will keep themselves from attaining the success they are capable of. So all of these fears are things that a Tao cultivator will have to work on to recognize, to realize, and see very clearly if they are manifesting in themselves. If they are, then it's time to scrutinize, and by scrutiny, causing them to vanish. So the role of fear. There's many other kinds of fears. There's the fear of death. That's a big one. There's any number of other fears that I'm not addressing, but this is just, hopefully, this is just the overall list of ideas, a beginning to keep you, to help you start thinking about the topic for yourself. What is the role of fear? What is the role that fear plays in your life? Okay, so having done the line by line for the first half, that is lines 1 to 6, we're now ready to tackle the second half. The second half is using visual metaphors to depict the functioning of the Tao, of the way of reality. So first, I want to zoom in on these 3 characters. The Master Executioner is the one who kills as an official duty. Here, it's not a person. This is actually just another way to describe the heavenly net. In the previous chapter, the term heavenly net came up as a way to describe the all-encompassing effect of karmic cause and effect. That no matter what you do, you can't escape from that. That if you do something really dumb, you can get yourself killed. So it's a way to describe karma. That part of it, if you do something dumb, you get yourself killed, which is in the beginning of the last chapter, is where the Master Executioner fits in. So the idea is that if you have done something to put yourself in danger out of your thoughtless bravery, then Master Executioner is called in to do what the executioner does best, i.e. execute you. So the Master Executioner is always there, always present. It's there to catch anyone who does something to endanger themselves. On the internet, if you were to look up keyword karma, you see all kinds of people who are just calling out to the Master Executioner. So an example is a group of guys who are sitting in a tub. There's a lot of water around, and they are using pieces of wood to float a power strip and to make it long enough so that their electronic devices in the center of the pool on a flotation device can play music. So they have like a little stereo in the middle of the pool that's floating, and they're plugging that in to electrical supply on a power strip, which is resting on a floating plank. So, you know, at any moment, someone's going to make a splash. A lot of electricity is going to course through those guys, and that's it. The master executioner has come. You know, that's what I mean. So it's another way to describe heavenly nets or karma. And it makes sense in view of the previous chapter. Those who are bold in thoughtless daring will be killed. That's what it says in chapter 73. Now, let me also note that the legal system itself is a manifestation of karma. This is speaking out against an individual like you and me taking on the role that you think karma should play. Like, so-and-so is a horrible person. Someone should exact vengeance on him so that justice is done. While there's no someone who should do it, karma will see to it. If not in this lifetime, then the next lifetime. Sooner or later, it's going to pan out. It's going to balance out. The scales will balance. But if you try to do that, then that's a bad idea. Now, if karma doesn't get that person, if that person is engaged in all kinds of illegal activities, the legal system stands in for karma in that instance. The legal system is composed of individuals, but it's not a single person. So not a case, I'm not talking about a case where it is the emperor or the king who has the power of life and death, you know, over an individual. I'm talking about a legal system that functions in semi-acceptable manner. It's an apparatus of society. Society has no choice but to create something like that to keep itself intact and coherent. Not to say that it's perfect, but the idea is that it's a system unto itself. It's a system that will safeguard society. And if you take the functioning of the legal system upon yourself, you've become the vigilante. You've become the judge, jury, and executioner in one person. And that is what this chapter is speaking against. Okay. So the idea with the master executioner is that someone who walks a negative path, who has dished out a lot of negativity, will end up with karmic results, karmic consequences, karmic causes and effects, and that includes being killed. And then you can say that the master executioner has come and has done his or her duty. Okay, so what if you are impatient? What if you don't want to wait for the master executioner to do his work? Well, then you may feel like you have to take matters into your own hands. So this idea to substitute for the master executioner, it means killing from the individual perspective. So this could be you pulling the trigger on the gun. This could be you approving capital punishment. So you can look at this from different angles. So remember, as I was looking at this for the first time, I'm still thinking, yeah, capital punishment, you know, burn them all. They don't deserve to live. That was my thinking. Now I encountered this concept, and then I realized that all along, I've been thinking of myself as being in the position of judge, jury, and executioner, in that I approve of killing via the legal system, so I kind of feel less guilty because of it, but I'm still sanctioning personally, philosophically, agreeing to the act of killing. So, as I mentioned, to be Batman, to be a vigilante, is to mete out justice according to your specific judgment, specific action according to your judgment. So right away, you can see a potential problem with that, because your judgment may not be perfect. You may not see all different sides of the issue. You may be meting out what you think is justice, but it's actually an injustice from other perspectives. And then there will be other self-appointed vigilantes who will come after you for having done the injustice so they can mete out their version of justice. Then society descends into chaos as everyone takes the law into their own hands. So what is the approval of capital punishment? Well, I say that it's delegating that specific action, killing, to other hands. I don't want to do it. I don't want to kill anyone, but I will pay with my tax money. I will pay for other people to do it. Well, it's indirect, but I'm actually still responsible because I enable it to occur. So I want to be very clear and honest with myself in my own personal Dao cultivation. I never want to delude myself in any way, shape, or form. So I have to face up to the reality that when I approve of or sanction or agree to endorse, support capital punishment, in effect, even though it's indirect, I am responsible for killing. There's just no way to get around it. You know, I don't care how tenuous the link is. It's still connecting me with the life that's being taken away. So that's what I'm saying. So, surprise, surprise, Lao Tzu would not approve of Batman, would not approve of our bloodthirsty nature, would not approve of anyone taking up the role of the Master Executioner. No exception. You know, it's not for Batman to take on. It's not for Dirty Harry to take on. It's not for any of us, really. It's, if anyone should take on that role, it should be the system that we set up. And even then, we have to really think twice about putting people to death via that system. So let's get to the next metaphor. The next metaphor being used is the Great Carpenter. So two characters, Da means big, and then Jiang, carpenter. It could also be used for craftsman or a professional engaged in construction of some kind. And no, the Great Carpenter is not a reference to Jesus. So this is nothing to do with Christianity. This metaphor is used in entirely different ways. So the Great Carpenter is a master craftsman who can trim and cut timber pieces of wood to exactly the dimensions needed. So that's what the Great Carpenter does. And to do that work, the Great Carpenter has a variety of different tools that he can use to trim and cut wood. So this is yet another way to describe the Tao, the heavenly net, karma, or the Master Executioner. So remember, different labels, but the same celestial, metaphysical mechanism that rules all of our lives. So think about the carpenter for a moment and consider that you can imagine the Tao as the universal architect and builder. In that role, when the Tao trims wood, it's eliminating the unnecessary in order to build. What do I mean by that? Well, I have a piece of wood. It's bigger than the plank that I need to go into a particular place in my construction. Therefore, I trim away the parts that are not necessary. I shorten it to the length that I need. I cut away what I won't use. That's a direct metaphor to the workings of evolution. When you have people who are dumb enough to cause harm to themselves and maybe to innocent bystanders, then the master builder or the great architect, the great carpenter, evolution itself is going to trim them out of existence by having the master executioner take them out of the game of evolution itself. So they no longer participate in passing on their traits, their characteristics to the next generation. So trimming wood, thinning the herd, trimming humanity. So think about that for 1 second, and we'll advance to the next slide. Then we're going to talk about Just like we talked about substituting for the master executioner, it's possible that human beings would also feel like, well, why I can't, I don't see proper trimming taking place. Like, that's a really bad guy. He needs to be taken out. So I'm going to do it myself. Well, then you are taking on the role of the Great Carpenter. So let's take a look at how we can translate these 4 characters. So literally, the first character is to substitute. Second character is big, vast, tremendous, great. We'll use great. And then character for carpenter, craftsman, builder, and then the last character. This is ancient Chinese. This is not used so much in modern Mandarin, but it means to cut. So substitute, Great Carpenter, cut. And it means substitute for the Great Carpenter, to cut. That's how you make it more readable in English. So as I mentioned, it's all about the working of evolution, weeding out those who are unfit to participate, continue participation in life. Last time, I framed it, I expressed it in a bunch of different ways, like when dumb people kill themselves, think of it as evolution in action. And a similar expression on that is natural selection at work, or natural selection in progress. And then, of course, there's the Darwin Awards. Okay, so the basic idea is pretty simple. If you take lives, you basically assign yourself the role of the Great Carpenter to trim wood, or you pretend that you are the Master Executioner. So let me pause for a moment and comment on how this is really a very attractive fantasy. So think about the number of movies we have where justice is done like that by a single individual, the hero, and he's cast as the hero, positive role model for all males, that he is the judge, jury, and executioner, that he metes out justice when the law doesn't work, when police can't touch the bad guy, when he's above the law, then this hero, this lone wolf, has to take action. So it's a very attractive fantasy. We think about that, as especially I think as young men, we all have this power fantasy, which is the reason why we watch action movies, read comic books, and so on. Taxi driver. So the key word is that the attractive fantasy is a fantasy. It's not reality. So just pointing out the home truth here, our entertainment is full of this. Turn on the television, look at the current movie listing in the theaters around the country. It takes no work at all to point out the movies and the TV show programs that are depicting this fantasy right now, even as we speak. So there is a catch. So it's in order for us to enjoy this fantasy, we at some point had to wake up to the reality. The last line of this chapter, it is rare that they do not hurt their own hands. So the idea is that you're not the Great Carpenter. You're not the Master Executioner. The Great Carpenter has a whole bunch of tools, the tools of carpentry, that he uses with great skill and expertise, skills and expertise that you don't have. And therefore, when you attempt to use the same tools to trim wood, to cut wood, well, it's rare that you won't hurt yourself in the process. So let's analyze this. As opposed to fantasy, the reality is that we lack the expertise of the Master Executioner or the Great Carpenter. To take matters into our own hands can mean making mistakes for no other reason than that we're human. we're not perfect, we're fallible. Our perceptions can be skewed. We may not see what we think we see. Reality may be different than what we perceive. So all kinds of cases are possible. Human memory is imperfect. Events may not have occurred exactly as we recall. If we were to play back on, videotape, audio tape recording, it may be a little bit different. That, hey, I don't remember it like that. Well, but the evidence is that it happened in a different way. It's just that in your mind, it's been changed in accordance with what you would prefer to remember. So we're human. If we're human and we engage in killing, substituting for the Master Executioner and the Great Carpenter, then when we make a mistake, that means the killing of innocence. That means killing someone who hasn't done what we thought that they had done. It means killing incorrectly, wrongfully. So what is our world? What is reality? What are we facing? The latest study, I did some research on this, as you can see, from the National Academy of Sciences estimates that our system of capital punishment has a 4% error. The cover of the study from National Academy of Sciences says that this estimate is very likely to be way too conservative, that the actual figure is considerably higher than 4%. Even if it's only 4%, that's horrifying. That means for every 24 guilty people that you put to death, there's one person that you put to death wrongly, perhaps after a lifetime of imprisonment. That's horrifying. I find that to be horrifying. What if that person one day happens to be yourself or someone you care about? Family, loved ones, relatives, friends? It could happen. Those odds, I'm not sure that I like them. Is it acceptable to a civilized society, a 4% error rate on all the people that you put to death? I think a truly civilized society would not accept that, would demand an error rate that's as close to zero as possible. Indeed, the ideal society would require that the error rates be 0% if it is to have any capital punishment at all. But since we face reality as human beings who can never ever get to 0%, then why even put anyone to death? Lifetime imprisonment would be good enough without us trying to be or endorsing the action of someone else trying to be the master executioner. So for me, that 4% error, that's pretty sobering. So specifically for society, capital punishment means the following. Number one, it makes all of us a little bit hypocritical because in capital punishment, we're doing exactly what we condemn: premeditated murder, premeditated killing. Just because we couch the killing in legal phrases doesn't make it any different than the ending of someone's life. That's what it is. So we have to accept that if we were to go with capital punishment, then we'll be doing exactly what we're punishing people to do. And capital punishment also means, because of the finality of death, because it's a complete end to a lifetime, to a life, it cuts off any possibility of remorse or any remedies whatsoever, any possibility of forgiveness. If someone is truly remorseful for what they have done, if you kill them before they get to that point, there's nobody to forgive because they're dead. So due to the imperfect nature of all of us as human beings, we're not perfect. Our legal system is not perfect. We know it's probably never ever going to be perfect because we built it. We're not perfect. So there has to be, we have no choice but to build in a whole bunch of processes to appeal the death sentence. We don't have any choice, because if you don't have the appeal process, you could be making horrible mistakes all the time without the possibility of reversing that. So because we have this process of appeals, any implementation in our society of capital punishment becomes extremely expensive in terms of all the lawyers that get involved, the time that gets devoted, the cases that are tried, appeals that are made, considered, rejected, reappealed, all that. So estimations often put the cost of capital punishment in the millions for that very reason, and for a tiny fraction of that, you can keep someone in lifelong imprisonment so they cannot harm anyone else in society. Now, despite the extensive appeals we have, we still end up with wrongful executions. That's becoming clear now, especially in this day and age with DNA evidence. We now know about the people who we put to death wrongfully. The DNA evidence makes that clear. Now, I'm not pretending that all of the people, everyone who we put to death is a saint and did not do the crime. Not saying that at all. I'm only pointing out that we have put people to death who don't deserve to die. That's just the truth. So the last point is also the most important point. It harkens back to the very beginning of this chapter. So remember, with the Tao Te Ching, I said previously, I have repeated quite a few times that number one, you always have to reflect on the different levels of meaning. So it's not just the king or the emperor ruling the empire, ruling the kingdom. It's you running your life, you managing your life, your interactions with other people, and you thinking, you contemplating, you representing and considering life itself, thinking to yourself. So that's number one. Number two is that when you get to the end of the Tao Te Ching, you always have to wrap it around to the beginning to see how it matches the beginning, and you will find that it comes full circle. So here we see an example of that. At the very end, in the very last line, we see the problem with capital punishment is that it lacks the intended deterrence effect because it's dependent on fear. What if you have someone who's not quite right in the head and therefore has no fear? Or what if you have someone who's ideologically committed to an action and therefore has no fear? Or have someone who's in the grips of, as I mentioned, extreme emotions and therefore has no fear? There are so many situations where fear is not part of the equation. Therefore, the deterrence loses its power, loses its effect. So this goes back to the very beginning. So why even do it in the first place if it doesn't have the effect that you were looking for? It just doesn't make any sense. So you have now followed the chapter line by line from beginning to end, and you have followed the thought process that Lao Tzu went through as he wrote these characters one by one, and in the exact same tone that he intended when he wrote it. So I believe this will give you a clear understanding of this particular chapter like no other translation will. Let's continue on. I think we have just one more slide to work through, and then we have to do the summary. So because of the importance of this last line, let me dive into the specific characters and explain how it's translated. So line 11, I'm highlighting it and calling it out down here. So we've got basically 7 characters. Let's take a look at what they are. First character means rare. Second character can be has, have, there is, there are. I'll just pick has. So like rarely has there been a case is what it says. And then we have the same character here, familiar character by now. Bu, it means the character for no or not. And then shang, to injure, to harm, to hurt. So I'll pick injure. Qi, it could be his, her, its, their. I'll pick there. And then so, only one translation, hand. And then this right here, I translate as end, but that's not a good translation. This character is a sentence ending punctuation mark. In ancient Chinese, in classical Chinese, there wasn't the concept of punctuation marks, like the question mark, exclamation mark, or the period. Therefore, certain characters are created to denote the end of a sentence for special emphasis. So if I were translating this again, I would translate that to exclamation. So at the very end, imagine an exclamation here. So basically, Lao Tzu is saying that, well, listen, it's rare that they do not hurt their own hands, okay? That's the tone of the original. He's emphasizing the importance of that last line. So overall, I think it's clear. I'll just reiterate just one more time. You take the unfamiliar tools of the carpentry expert, the master craftsman, the great carpenter, and you try to cut wood with those tools. You don't really know those tools really well. You don't know what you're doing. You fumble around. So what happens? Well, it's almost inevitable. You inadvertently cut your hand as you're trying to cut wood, or you're hammering something, you get your thumb instead. It's that type of scenario. We have all seen it. So that is likened to what happens when you imagine that you are the judge, jury, executioner, and you try to do what karma already does. You make mistakes, you hurt yourself in the process. What does that mean to the vigilante? Well, if you exact personal justice, it means people will seek vengeance against you. So in effect, you are harming yourself. Now, for a society, as I mentioned before, to do that, to do what the master executioner of the Tao does, it means that society lessens itself. It's no longer the ideal or great society. That society lowers itself to the next notch in the reckoning of great civilizations. It is not qualified for greatness. Okay, so that pretty much ends the line by line, character by character explanation of 74. As you guys know, what I will do is that I will come up with examples, illustrations, emphasis on 74 next time, and then we will do the paraphrase. So now let's take a look at the summary for today. So these are just some thoughts that I want to suggest, some questions that I want to suggest for everyone to ask. So first, fear in your life. So question, what are your fears? Everyone has probably a different set of fears. How much does fear influence your thinking and your approach to life? And what have you missed out on because of fear? So this is not for me, this is for you. These are the questions for you to ask yourself. And the second big thing to remind everyone of is the concept of the master executioner. So we can all agree society should protect itself through laws, law enforcement, through a system of punishment that fit the crime, etc. So that protection, we're not advocating that we undo all of that. Question is, to what extent? And does it need to really include killing, even for the most heinous individuals? There are plenty of societies, Norwegian countries for one, that have decided that yes, our society should protect itself, but that protection does not have to include the killing or the taking of human lives. So, bottom line is that if you have not considered this topic in depth before, or perhaps if you were like me, someone who's a die-hard supporter, even a fan, a cheering fan of capital punishment, then perhaps I am hoping that this chapter will be an invitation for you to look a little deeper in the subject. I certainly have changed my mind about that. I certainly would no longer support capital punishment in any way, shape, or form. That's where I personally stand. I do not want to impose my views on anyone. All I ask is that you think about this matter for yourself. On that,
let's go ahead and do the meeting ending ritual, everybody. 起立，面向佛堂，持架三鞠躬，一鞠躬，再鞠躬，三鞠躬，持架规格是一鞠躬，接班一鞠躬。Okay, everybody, we are done.